Welcome back to America's Lost History. In the introductory overview video, if you haven't seen it, the link is below. We talked about how three warnings from US presidents, all about the same thing, about secret societies, the CIA, how the government really, in a secret way, through the security agencies, have become sort of unsupervised and out of control. And for myself, I've always known about Eisenhower's warning about the military-industrial complex and how that could feed on itself and be a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of growth. But I hadn't known about two other presidential warnings, and one of which was given to me by a friend, my friend John, JFK's warning. So let's go through in this part. Let's go through the warnings, and that'll sort of set us up for the next part two, which is some of the mistakes we've made as a country. And the country's been enormously successful, the United States, but we've made some mistakes. And I think it's because we've forgotten about these warnings. So the intent of this series is really to remind people of what these three presidents said, and to look at the problems and in the future how we might be able to work a little bit differently and do some things proactively that could prevent other mistakes. So that said, let's move on to the actual warnings. So the first warning comes from President Eisenhower in his farewell speech. And on the left-hand side is the warning about the military-industrial complex. And on the right-hand side is a warning about bureaucrats running sort of as scientific experts running policy. So let's hear it. I'll let you hear it in his own words because I think that's probably the best way to do this. And these are just short clips from his speech.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
Okay, so there Eisenhower speaks about the possibility of the military-industrial complex becoming too powerful, and that we have to be a well-informed citizenry to keep them in check. So this is going to tie in later on to censorship. And the problem with censorship is that we'll only be hearing what the government says. So we really need to have other voices, other experts, outside opinions. So that was his first warning. The other warning, actually, I hadn't discovered until about a year ago, and that is this concept of having the technological bureaucracy dictate our policies. And again, we need to be well informed, have other opinions. So let me play that and stop talking myself.
A substitute for intellectual.
Okay, let's try that again. A little bit of a glitch here.
In the same fashion, the free university, historically the fountainhead of free ideas and scientific discovery, has experienced a revolution in the conduct of research. Partly because of the huge costs involved, a government contract becomes virtually a substitute for intellectual curiosity. For every old blackboard, there are now hundreds of new electronic computers. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
Okay, so Eisenhower is talking about the bureaucracy of scientists, experts, technological elite that controls our policy, and that we need to be well-informed citizenry. So again, we can't have censorship. We need to be able to hear other opinions. During the COVID years, we had the Great Barrington proposal was totally censored. Famous folks like Dr. J. Bhattacharya was censored. I think I butchered his name a bit there, but we most people couldn't hear these things unless you went to alternative sources, podcasts, or Joe Rogan or places like that, or Glenn Greenwald, Matt Taibbi, Michael Schellenberg, these other folks who were having their own podcasts and speaking about some of the other concepts and thoughts about COVID, and particularly the quote unquote vaccine that we found that really wasn't a vaccine. So it doesn't hurt to have other information. I think that's Eisenhower's warning here to make sure we're well informed, and we have to have that information, a free flow of information for a democracy to really function. Okay. Our next president is JFK, John Kennedy. Let's take a look at what we've got there from him. Oh, by the way, there are a couple of videos here that are interesting. I'm not going to play them, but the links will be below. And there's one is a montage of the media telling us not to do research. Don't look at other things. Just listen to the government. And it's everyone from CNN, ABC, MSNBC, New York Times, Forbes, ESPN, and Comedy Central, all telling us don't do research, and that we're not scientists. We shouldn't be doing research. And then there's another video that's a companion for that, which is Jimmy Dore, who's a comedian, and goes through how it's research used to be called when I was a kid reading. They're telling us not to read. So if you have time, you can look at those two videos. They're kind of interesting. They'll be in the description below for those links. Okay, let's get on to Kennedy here. So the center picture here is a picture of Kennedy's inauguration, and I have it here because only 3 months later, 3 months after his inauguration, on April 27th, 1961, he had this speech to the press. So it was probably never televised. I'm not sure, but I never heard of it until my friend John sent it to me. And some say, in the heading here is, it's a speech that got him killed, that got Kennedy killed. And it really was a speech that explained, without naming the CIA specifically, he speaks of it, and he speaks of the security and the power and the problem. And this happened, and we'll explain why on the left-hand side of the screen here. All of the things that happened to Kennedy within the first 90 days of administration that was out of his control, that the CIA was doing without his approval, and sometimes without his knowledge. So let's play his video here now, and you can hear his own words. And this is about 2.5 minutes. We'll play, not the whole speech. This is an excerpt from his speech.
Opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Can't seem to get this exactly queued up here. Hold on. Okay, we got it. Come on.
Ladies and gentlemen, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary.
So there we have President Kennedy speaking about a secret society and secret powers that combine military, political, scientific, statecraft. I mean, he's really talking about sort of what's later been called the Blob, the State Department with the Defense, that's Department of Defense and the CIA sort of working together to do a lot of things in a secretive way. And now, why did Kennedy want to do this so quickly? So he was inaugurated in January and April of the same year, 1960, when he gave that speech. But if you look at what happened to him, you could see, what his concerns were. So there was Lumumba's assassination in the Congo, and there's a lot of evidence that the CIA was involved with that. And he, had already expressed that this is not something he wanted to happen. But it happened 3 days before he took office. So that was sort of strike one with the CIA. There were lots of other strikes. There's probably like 4 strikes here. We could admit 3 others. So this picture here on the left is Allen Dulles. He was head of the CIA, had a lot of power. Before becoming the head of the CIA, he was the head of the Office of Secret Services, which was the spy agency for World War II. So he has a long history of sort of going on his own. And there's a book we'll talk about later, The Devil's Chessboard, which speaks to his career. Incredible career, incredibly aggressive. So what he had done is he had also, before Kennedy's election, there was the U-2 plane incident. It was a spy plane. And the spy plane, Allen Dulles wanted to push further into the interior of the Soviet Union, even though we knew they had better ways to identify and shoot down these things. This plane got shot down, and for a few years, the pilot was held hostage before he was released during Kennedy's administration. So that was, already a sign of other aggression. But the other things that happened was there was a coup attempt on Charles de Gaulle, the president of the Prime Minister of France. And the Prime Minister of France here had plenty of reasons to believe that the CIA was part of this coup to unseat him. He was sort of France first. He wasn't participating as much in NATO, and he kind of wanted to be. He really was less of a globalist and more of a nationalist for France. So he wasn't liked, obviously by the Blob or the CIA and those folks. And there were newspapers. There was a French newspaper, Le Monde. There was an Italian newspaper, El Paese, which speaks to how the CIA was probably involved in this coup attempt. Now, Kennedy had to reassure him that the CIA was not behind any of the coup attempts. And there were literally generals from World War II, French generals, that were paratrooping in, trying to really take over the capital of France. But interestingly enough, I'm probably going to butcher his name too, but Hervé Alfond was the French ambassador to the United States. And in his memoir, and I can't pronounce that either, L'Atonement d'Etre, maybe The Atonement in 1977, his memoirs, he wrote that JFK confessed to him that JFK was not in full control of the CIA. And that the coup did fail, but that the CIA was involved with it. But he personally, Kennedy, was not involved. But the CIA was a bit out of control. Then there was the Bay of Pigs fiasco, and this is, I won't get into a lot of details, but again, Allen Dulles wanted to invade Cuba. It's a long story, but really they were at odds and they were expecting Kennedy to support it, and it failed because Kennedy would not, as he said earlier, would not provide military support if there was any problem. So we had Lumumba's assassination, a U-2 plane incident, Charles de Gaulle attempt on a coup attempt, the Bay of Pigs. So there was a lot going on with the CIA that frustrated Kennedy. So if you look at if you look at not only that speech, but this famous quote of his that JFK said after all of this frustration, I will splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it into the winds. So he's pretty frustrated, obviously. Um, and then you have, I mean, I guess there's really a lot of documentation that shows that Kennedy was probably assassinated by the CIA. And to the right here, we've got a little video clip. I'll play it. It's a soundbite that was repeated on a podcast of RFK saying that he really is convinced that the CIA killed his uncle. And later on, he says probably his father as well, RFK. So let's see if we can get that going without too many glitches.
So I don't agree that it is.
Hold on. This I got trouble here.
So I.
Okay, here we go.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a Democratic presidential hopeful, has blamed the CIA for the death of his uncle, President JFK, in a recent interview on the radio. Let's take a listen to that.
Who do you think really killed your uncle?
Well, I think there's overwhelming evidence that the CIA was involved in this murder. I think it's beyond a reasonable doubt at this point. People, who question that.
So I don't agree that it is beyond a reasonable doubt, like proven, et cetera, that the CIA was involved. What I do appreciate is that the government might have known more than it was telling us for a long time, was very not transparent about releasing the files. Some of them have now finally been released.
So as you can see, the host of the Rising of that podcast doesn't completely agree, but there is a lot of evidence, and I think RFK might be a little bit closer to it than he is. But if you read The Devil's Chessboard, this is a really interesting book. The Devil's Chessboard, it goes through Allen Dulles' career during World War II and how he actually signed the peace treaty with German generals after the war to align partisans from Germany and Italy to fight back and push back on the Soviets, and actually kind of started the Cold War, as a lot of people say. But he was kind of a maverick and went off on his own, did a lot of things. But it's a really really interesting book, and there's a lot of evidence in that book too about how he was probably involved with Kennedy's assassination. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that Dulles was probably, the person behind it. And then there were two movies here. You might remember the older movie with Kevin Costner, JFK by Oliver Stone. And in 2022, I think it is, 2022, Oliver Stone created another movie, JFK Revisited, because other documentation came out and more clear that this was, hidden. The truth of what happened to Kennedy was really hidden. And then finally, we have the remaining security agency files on JFK assassination that's still not released, even though a law was passed in Congress to release all of the Kennedy files relating to the Kennedy assassination back in October of 2027. So here we are 5 years later, in 2024, 6 years later, and 7 years later, we still don't have those documents released. So you have to wonder why. So let's move on to the next presidential warning. All right. Well, as I said in the introduction, Truman preceded Kennedy. But it wasn't until Kennedy was assassinated, really, long after Truman came out of office, because Truman was president towards the end of World War II. And in December 21st, 1961, he published his letter, opinion piece, in the Washington Post called Limit CIA Role to Intelligence. And he did this 30 days after Kennedy's assassination. I don't think that's an accident. I think it was Senator Kennedy, the current Senator Kennedy from Louisiana, who has made a comment about, not this in particular, but when things look too coincidental, he has this saying, he has a lot of funny Southern sayings. He says, when you find a turtle on top of a fence post, he didn't get there by himself. Somebody put that turtle on top of the fence post. And I think that relates to what happened here. I think Truman, kind of timed this, saw what was happening during the Kennedy administration with the CIA, and then saw his assassination. And only 30 days after Kennedy's assassination, sent this letter to the New York Post, which was published. He said, I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but for some time I have been disturbed by the way the CIA has been diverted from its original assignment. It's become operational and at times a policy-making arm of the government. So it's kind of on its own making policy. It's not just collecting information, because Truman created the CIA. It was supposed to be an information gathering organization to support the president's decision making. But I'll put a link here you'll see a link here. I'll put it below. So all of these things will have links below in the description, so you can read it yourself if you want to read it right out of the New York Post, out of the Washington Post. And then in 2015, and again, there's a link here too, below this picture uh, from the U.S. News and World Report, which said this was in 2015 during the Obama administration, Truman's call to rein in the CIA. This is in 2015. And the subtitle says, Obama and Congress need to get serious about reining in the CIA, just as Truman advised in 1963. So it's not a presidential warning, but it's a reminder of the warning. Okay. So that's Truman's warning to us. And below this, there'll be a link below here, and will also be in the description if you want to read the entire article. Because I like to leave receipts, as journalists say, leave receipts and evidence, and not just my opinion. All right, so those are the three presidential warnings, all about the same thing essentially. And either because the country's got amnesia or never heard of these, I certainly hadn't heard of these until more recently, other than Eisenhower. But now that we're reminded of it, let's look at things that have happened because of the CIA, the State Department working with the Defense Department on foreign affairs, and how some of it has gone awry, kind of as Truman said, creating policy on their own. So let's look at the next section here, the results from ignoring these or not knowing about these warnings. So that'll be the next video. I'll cover parts 2 and 3, foreign affairs and domestic affairs. I'm going to stop this video here because I'm going to make sure I don't put you all asleep with a video that's way too long. So we're about 22 minutes in now. So bye for now, and look forward to another video being posted.